Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LoCoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin Conlon, owner of Team LoCoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com. All right, y'all, I am joined by a special guest today who is one of my close friends, business mentors, and just one of my favorite all-around people. I feel like I always say that when I introduce people that I have on the podcast, but obviously I'm only going to have favorite people on my podcast, so it's like, okay, it makes sense. And I do not want to butcher your background because you have so much that you've done and so many cool things. So without further ado, hi, Dr. Joe.
I'm glad I'm at least one of your favorite people.
You're one.
I'll take it.
You're kind of on that cusp of good to great, it's like one of the, you're there, but you've survived
I'll keep working hard. I'll get there.
You've survived some sketchy Airbnbs we've had that bond, so it's like, once you survive that, I feel like your friendship goes to the next level.
Right.
We stayed in some terrible places last year for anybody who does.
Blame it all on Paul. It's always Paul's fault.
It's always Paul's fault, generally, except I did feel really bad because I picked the place. I was like, fuck you, Paul. I'm done with your bullshit Airbnbs. So I picked the place in Pittsburgh, and then it was like a murder house. It was literally.
It was like Friday the 13th, part 12.
I walked in, I was like, oh my God, because honestly, the pictures, and then I showed you guys the listing, the photos looked nice, and then no, not nice.
Like weapons and murder implements on the wall.
I was so terrified. Yeah, so really, really cool place. But in any case, Dr. Joe, give us a little bit about your background first before we dive into today's topic.
All right, just real briefly, I started out as a physical therapist. I transitioned once I was in college. I was doing business and marketing and all that, and thought, man, I can't do this for the rest of my life. I want to do something in exercise and fitness. But in the 90s, actually the late 80s, there was really no such thing as exercise science or the things that you see today. So physical therapy was a great career. I loved it. I did orthopedics for a few years. As soon as I came out, I was still in that school mode. I was hungry to learn. I was growing in my own bodybuilding career. And so I continued on and ended up with a doctorate in nutrition, absolutely just for fun. I mean, I just thought I'm going to be a physical therapist the rest of my life. And then I won my pro card and I started writing for a lot of the top fitness magazines, and one thing led to another. And all of a sudden I created this kind of coaching platform. And before there was anybody out there doing nutrition coaching at all, I just thought, just by sheer happenstance, as I'm creating an editorial for a magazine I wrote for, and they needed an ad because we traded ad space for writing. And I said, I don't know, maybe somebody would hire me to do contest prep. So I put this little ad in a magazine for contest prep. And now 20 years later, it's a thing. It's an industry. It's $1 billion industry with coaches and a whole career trajectory. So later on, I started getting involved deeper in writing and wrote a couple books. And one of my co-authors was a medical doctor. And I thought we would end up doing a lot of writing together and maybe some other things. So I wanted to get a little bit different angle on my academic side. And so I did another doctorate in health education. So I'd have a terminal degree that was more in general health than just nutrition. And then, later on, I did another master's in creative and professional writing, and now doing one in social psychology. But, my primary academic career is in the physical and health science area.
5 casual degrees, all good. That's my favorite. You're just I just kind of decided to get another degree. When most people, that's a life altering decision. You're I'll just go back to school. No big deal. But that's just the type of person you are, which I love, absolutely love. And yeah, it is fun, right? But so today's topic is actually going to be something that's really, really, I don't want to say, well, I guess it is polarizing. And that's not really the goal of this. It's more of just hey, we want to lay out the facts. And we're going to be talking about low-fat diets. And so when people hear low-fat diets, immediately they think the worst. They think, oh, you're just having boiled tilapia and 10 grams of fat for months. No, that is not what we're recommending. That's completely, that is not very healthy, not a good idea. And we can kind of dive into that. But just in general, the idea of having, more carbs with less fat, and then versus kind of the new narrative that has been, lower carb, higher fat has become kind of the more norm, right? I think we would both agree a lot, especially in like a lot of the nutrition talk. And there is reason and good place for that. But as far as body comp goes, over the years, I mean, I would think you would agree that kind of the traditional bodybuilding diet, air quotes, if anybody's just listening and not watching, is, higher carb, lower fat. That was kind of always what people did. And people assumed like that was a bodybuilding diet. And I started to just realize that just really worked out for a lot of people, not everybody, but it just kind of works easier when you're moderating your fat intake, because when carbs and fats are present together, that's when it's really easy to overconsume calories and to then put on body fat. Like, it's just the way that it is. It's just the way that our brains are wired. It's the way that our body's wired. Like, if there's high carbs and high fat, hey, hello obesity, right? Like, that's just what it is. But so I think it's a lot easier for people. I think why high fat took off was because it was easy for people to limit their carbs, which then limited the carbs and fat foods together, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, well, there's always been kind of a push and a pull in this. So traditionally, I think you would see that a higher carb, lower fat diet reigned supreme for a long time. But then in the 50s, a physician created kind of a low carb diet. And I think that was even done in the 20s or 30s. I remember looking up some ad copy that was from way back then. And somebody saying, bread was going to make you fat and all that. So Dr. Atkins popularized that in the 70s, and then the resurgence in the 90s. And then you had all the offshoots of South Beach diet and paleo and so forth. And now there really is a polarized community. There are a lot of people who think that one is better than the other. And if you just stick to research headlines, if you just look at the titles and maybe even some of the abstract outcomes, it would almost look like there's absolutely no clear winner. I mean, there are some studies that show absolutely a low carb diet is better, and other studies show absolutely a low fat diet is better. So you really have to dig into the methodology and the study design. And that's what I would really like to talk about, because in every single category you could classify diet success, a lower fat diet wins hands down. But if you just do a cursory look through some of the headlines, as I said, you would not see that. No.
And so what are some of the things that they're looking for as people who are just interested in this? Like, obviously one thing is going to be adherence. That's one thing. But another thing is just kind of like long-term diet, like dietary success. And that's really the biggest thing when you're looking at diet research, is not like, hey, what's this 12-week diet going to do? Right? It's like, what happens afterwards? And like, if we follow people for a long period of time, what is actually happening here? And like, that's the hardest thing about diet research, to be completely honest, is following people for a long amount of time and actually seeing what happens. And I mean, even when I did my research and it was 22 weeks, like that was, for all intents and purposes, people thought that was insanely long, right? And it was because of the limitations that we have for most, university-based research. But even that was like, I wish it was longer, you know what I mean? But it's just like, we don't have the resources, we don't have the time, we don't have people who are committed to doing this if you're not paying them, you know what I mean? Which most university research, you're not paying people. So you're like, hey, could you like come into the lab for a year, and there's nothing you're going to get out of this, but we're going to learn stuff, it's really hard. So what are some of the things that you've seen in that literature that's shown that lower fat diets have been more successful than higher fat diets?
Okay, so the first category chosen by Laurin is adherence and sustainability. Yeah. And I will say that University of Toronto, Harvard, a huge study in Australia, looked at all of the literature, did massive literature reviews, and they showed that the least diet with compliance is a ketogenic diet, a low carb diet. And it also causes the most binge eating. And then if you even go over to the National Weight Control Registry, which is, I think, probably in its 30th year running, where they have tens of thousands of people who can become members. You have to have lost at least 30 pounds and kept it off for a year. And then they want you to check in, almost like the long-term Harvard studies, like the lifelong happiness study. They want to track these people. So you now have tens of thousands of people who have lost an average of 70 pounds, who've kept it off for an average of 5 years. And you can look at all of their habits, and you do not see, low carb dieters in there, because it's completely unsustainable. And then my last point would be, even the Journal of American Medical Association did a similar literature review, and they ranked 59 diets. They stopped at 59 because they ran out of names of actual technically defined diets. And out of the 59 highest in sustainability, low carb ketogenic diets did not make the list. Not one out of almost 60 diets. And so again, when you look at the literature and you just look at those headlines and you think, wow, low carb diets are good, they win. Even just in culture, one time, I think last year, I looked at the top 100 books on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and there's always about a dozen diet books. Every single one of them were ketogenic diet books.
Oh yeah. How many people do you know, maybe, I don't know, but just kind of in your life, who say that, like, oh, I'm doing keto. So perfect example. So Ryan's a firefighter. So, you get a really wide variety of people who are firefighters, but most of them aren't like super meathead fitness, like how he is, right? And they might be in shape, but it's completely different. And there was a huge handful of people who were on kind of like the keto kick for a while. And some of them have stuck to it, but most of them haven't. But even within something like the fire department, which is just average people who some train, some don't, kind of basic level of nutrition at best, they're still like, oh, I'm going to do keto. Right. And it's so interesting how it like permeated society. And I think I would be interested in hear what you have to say, just because of like the social psych background. I think in a short term, it is easier, in my opinion, just based on what I was saying before. It's like, oh, I'm cutting out an entire food group. Like that makes my thinking process a lot easier. Because when I look at a food, or I go out to a restaurant and say, hey, I can't have that, right? Because that has carbs in it. So I'm going to have the piece of steak with vegetables or whatever, right? And so I think initially it's easier for people because it's like, oh, hey, I just cut this food group out. But then like what happens after a few weeks or a few months? I mean, even bodybuilders who have arguably some of the best willpower and, structure and discipline, even those people struggle with dietary adherence, right? So like somebody who has, low, like just discipline in their life, and you think that you're going to go on this incredibly rigid diet, like, yeah, it's going to work for a few weeks, but how long is that really going to work? Especially true keto, like the foods that you have to eat end up being so weird almost to actually get a keto, you know what I mean? Like, it's not just like
for long term, for sure.
For long term. And again, like, I think that there is something to it for like a short term if somebody like really wants to stick to something, and some people truly love eating like that, and that works for them. But for the majority of people, it is a very, very strict, rigid diet, and you're cutting an entire food group out. So I think that's what makes it so hard long term. But have you seen that kind of in your like friend circles, or just people that like, oh, I'm doing keto, and who knows if they're actually doing it or not, but like that,
yeah,
the norm.
The attraction for the general population is because it is incredibly defined. Everybody knows what it is. Say instantly, you just don't eat carbs.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't have to, as Nutrisystem ads say, do this complicated weighing and tracking and silliness and all that stuff. It's just, you just don't eat carbs. You can still go eat a 32-ounce steak. You can, do all that kind of stuff. Bullet coffee, put a stick of butter in your coffee, all that kind of stuff, as long as you just don't eat carbs. So it seems easy.
Yeah.
And it is the promise of, I don't have to starve. I can eat all the bacon I want as long as I don't have any toast or pancakes with that. So there is an attractability to it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people do, stick to it for long enough to get some general results. So you may see some motivation kick in because like, wow, I lost 5 pounds this week. This is really working. And so I'm going to do that. But then, like you said, as soon as you get down the road a little bit and you pick up that first little basket of tortilla chips, or you're at a birthday party, or you feel like having a beer, it just creates that slippery slope right back out.
Yeah. And so when we talk about low fat diets, whether it's in the literature or just kind of how you're classifying it, I do want to kind of put some parameters on that for people, so they're not thinking that we're suggesting like you never eat dietary fat again, because that's clearly not what we're suggesting. So what would kind of be, either hard numbers or percentages or something that people could use in their mind to kind of know?
I think a good diet to even lose weight, you would still consume 20 to 25% of your calories from fat.
Mhm.
And I've seen people go as low as 15 just because they may have a preference. They just don't like, fatty foods. But you really can't get much lower than 20% just by the fat that's naturally in the food you eat. The couple grams here and there that are even in some carb sources like oatmeal, certainly in a chicken breast or something like this.
I hate that fat in the oatmeal. It's so annoying.
It messes up your numbers. Like, dang it, this is such a good food, and why are there 3 grams of fat in that thing?
I posted that one time, and then somebody was like, "No, there's these really good." I'm like, I get it. I'm not really that upset about it.
Count.
I'm like, it's fine. Like, I'm just annoyed, but it's fine. So yeah, I would say that that's a good kind of range for people. And even, and even now, I would say that there's definitely the literature is probably going to be too sparse to show this, but as far as like personal coaching, I'm interested to hear your take. I definitely have clients who respond much better to lower fat. And it's clear whether it's their blood work or it's how they're dropping body fat or just how they feel, and they keep their body composition in general. And for example, like myself, and look at that shaker cup. I'm so happy you just made that appearance.
He's paying me for the product placement.
That was great. I'm so happy you use that still. Sorry. So for example, for like
my pre-workouts in there.
Perfect. There we go. Are you going to train after this, or are you just drinking pre-workout?
I am, man.
Okay.
I'm going to crush the leg workout when we're finished. This is hyping me up for it. This is my warm up.
There we go. Workout. Yeah, I need a little pick me up. I just trained and I'm like dead. But no, so for me and Ryan, and actually even one of my coaches who was training here right now, Jillian, just as a few examples, like we do much better with lower fat. Now, not saying we don't have any fat. I mean, I still eat plenty of fat in a day. I'm not dieting right now. It's a little bit different, but especially in a not dieting phase, when my calories are a lot higher, as soon as I have a few days where I just kind of go like FASPO mode, like I'll have, you go out to eat and you have some dessert and you have some stuff that you shouldn't, it's just like calorie laden foods. I can just notice immediately. And then as soon as I go back to higher carb, lower fat, things, dramatically improve. And just from like a blood work perspective. So, Ryan genetically has a little bit higher cholesterol, which again is debated. I understand that. But in general, his LDL, can get a little bit higher. And so this was a while ago, but he literally was just kind of eating, high calorie, but then switched it to be very preferential to, like, for somebody his size, eating under 100 grams of fat is, that's a big decrease. So, if he keeps his fats around 100 and then just really brings his carbs up, he dropped his LDL 100 points in a month.
Wow.
Literally a month. And, now he's been doing that again. And even in some dieting situations with clients, I'll be like, hey, not long-term will I bring females fat super, super low, but sometimes to get that last bit off, it just seems to work much better for them. Like, hey, we'll bring carbs up a little bit and then we'll bring the fats down. And those are usually people who I say, like, hey, like, do you even like really like eating fats? Or like, not really, like I do just for like hormone health. Because long-term, if you plummet fats for females, like that's not a good idea either. But there have been times for many clients that I'll bring that down.
But that even has a lot to do with overall calorie intake, because
yes, for sure.
There are just as many studies showing that a high-fat diet decreases your healthy hormones. So in a study of even performance athletes, males who thought, hey, yeah, I need all this fat for testosterone, they showed the higher the fat percentage went, especially saturated fat, it actually decreased testosterone. So, it just, you definitely have to keep a certain percentage of fat in, but it really has a lot more to do with body composition and overall diet status.
Yeah. And have you seen that with certain clients too? Like some people just respond a lot better to that kind of lower end, and then you can, still bring the carbs up. Not crazy, because again, if somebody is dieting, but in general, keeping fats a little bit lower is helpful.
Yeah. I mean, besides, sustainability and compliance and what we're just talking about now, touching on hormones, probably the central thing is which actually makes me lose body fat the most. Like calorie for calorie, does a low carb or low fat diet work better? Because if I said, look, I'm willing to do whichever, like I don't care, just tell me which one does better. Let's look at actual inpatient studies. And one of the best ones was done by Dr. Kevin Hall, one of the lead researchers at the NIH. And because, you know, when I spoke, Dr. Bill Campbell, one of your mentors and probably thesis chair, when he was the president of the ISSN, he invited me down to speak at the national conference, and we got to spend some time, and we were talking shop. And he said, you know, one of the hardest things about nutrition research is that we can just factor in about a 30% non-compliance ratio. So, you know, you give somebody a diet and send them home, and you can just factor in, you know, you're only looking at about 70% truth. So if you have an inpatient study, these people are sleeping there, they're only eating what you give them. To me, that's always going to be the pinnacle of potential research. So look what Kevin Hall did. He brought in about 20 people, inpatient study. He baselined them out for 5 days. So everybody ate the same exact foods, the same amount based on their body composition, their caloric needs. They did all the metabolic testing. And after 5 days of baselining everybody out, one group got high carb, one got high fat. They went for 7 days, did all the metabolic testing, everything you could possibly do. As if that's not good enough, then they baselined them out again, and they flipped. So now if you were on the low carb, now you're on the low fat, they did all this testing, they found a 68% better result in the low fat dieting groups, both sides. Just, you know, take out all of the variables for which group you were in. And that's just one study. And I realize that there's a limitation to looking at just one, but that is the gold freaking standard of doing nutrition research. And when you then compare all inpatient studies to outpatient studies, that's when you find all inpatient studies. And I'm not an advocate for one way or the other. I'm not somebody who is pro one thing just to be anti something else. I just want to know the facts. So when you look at those inpatient studies, every single one of them show that a lower fat, moderate carb diet works better. It just works better. You're healthier. All the other tangent things we can talk about are there. But that's the home run for me. If I'm going to lose 68% more body fat, calorie for calorie, sign me up.
Yeah, sign me the fuck up. And for people who don't understand, like that kind of research is so hard to get. First of all, if somebody said, hey, do you want to live in this lab? You'd be like, what? And then also like, hey, you have to do both diet groups. You know, there's just a lot of limitations there, but it is the best. And particularly if the same person can do both interventions, that is the best thing that you can do in research, because then there's no like, oh, well, there is the, you know, person individuality, because that is a real thing. So if you say, hey, I'm going to do both of these, that is, again, the best thing that you could do. And thankfully, like with Campbell's research now, just kind of like shout out to them. They've, again, it is, there's no inpatient stuff, but they do have what we call like diet coaches now, which is a lot more helpful. So they basically, the subjects will send in diet recalls and things of that nature and talk with these people, which is a really cool thing that we have at our lab that a lot of other labs don't. But yeah, like when I did my diet research, like we were like, hey, fucking fingers crossed, hope you do this, hope you actually follow the diet. And you know, it's something that you can't 100% control. So you do have to put in there like, hey, here's this variation. But yeah, if you can get in-person studies to show that big of a difference, like that's huge. And again, I just want people to understand that, yeah, we're not anti one diet or the other. We're just looking at, hey, what's realistic? And so looking at fat loss, this is superior, hormone function, superior, as well as adherence, superior. So when you say, you know, moderate carb, lower fat, that simply means that you just have to make certain choices. You know, you can't always cook everything in fats, right? Or you use just a little bit, or you have a little bit leaner cut of meat. But then that still allows you to have like a serving of carbs on the side, or like you said, go have a beer at a barbecue, and then you're not completely like falling off your plan, and you're still able to make progress. And like I said, it's something that everybody's gonna have to kind of experiment with themselves. But I would say that the worst case scenario is when somebody's eating high carb and high fat together, or kind of a similar split. And I see that that's actually what a lot of people gravitate towards. If I have somebody who comes to me who hasn't really, I've really been tracking, I haven't really been watching my food intake, they send me what they've been doing, and I'm like, yeah, this is just not really ideal. Like it's kind of same calorie for calorie carbs and fats, and I just find that usually produces the worst body comp results in like my experience. And then kind of after that is like, hey, I'm going to watch my carbs, but I'm going to up my fats. But then really what I've seen is the best is, okay, hey, higher carbs, lower fats. And I have so many clients who are like, hey, can I just have more fats? And I'm like, we're already kind of pushing it. Like, if you want to have this many carbs, we really can't go past a certain amount of fats because you're just asking to gain body fat. Like, this just isn't ideal anymore. And would you say the same thing?
Yeah, and the reason is preferentially when you consume carbs, the body is going to use those first as energy. So any fat in that meal just gets stored as fat. And then if you don't have enough time between meals to use that, you just create that slippery slope of adding just a little bit of body fat every single meal cycle.
Yeah.
And so, and that goes into another thing that a lot of people don't realize, and you're hitting on it, I think, very well. It is total calories. And so sometimes, for that glucose disposal and just using that energy that you've consumed, you really do have to spread meals out. I know for a lot of people, matter of fact, I have a phone call with a client today, and the first thing I'm going to suggest with a little bit of a plateau is we have to extend the time between meals, because clearly you're not using what you're consuming, no matter how good compliance is.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have to say, when it gets really, really tough and somebody needs to grind out more body fat loss, bringing fat down so it's a cleaner calorie diet, and there's just less room for error, and yet you can still have the amount of carbohydrate you need for blood sugar to be stable and to really keep cravings at bay.
Mm-hmm.
It's just why it works better for fat loss and for compliance.
Yeah, 100%. The meal timing thing is definitely interesting. And that's something that, over the years I've changed my coaching style, of course. And before, I never even used to think to ask that kind of stuff, which looking back, you're like, wow, terrible idea. But because, you always think like, oh, well, I do this, so people must know to do that, right? And I sent this in a packet when they first started the program, so they must do it every week, right? And then you start realizing when you ask people for their diet logs and you're like, oh my God. Like, and these are people, some people who are even like advanced athletes, right? Like they have great physiques, they, they train hard, they do all this stuff. And you think they have a good grasp on it. And then you see that and you're like, wow, you eat like a 7-year-old. Like, this is not good. You know what I mean? Like, you don't eat appropriate meals. You eat weird stuff all the time. You know what I mean? And I think, and that's, this is a whole different topic, which we're not going to go down, but I think a lot of what flexible dieting or IFYM, part of the backlash that came from that I'm trying to clean up with a lot of people is that as long as I hit my macros, it doesn't matter. And it's like, well, it kind of still does. You know what I mean? Like, you still need meals spaced out, particularly protein needs to be spaced out at an appropriate level. You still need to have fruits and vegetables. I hate to break it to everybody. And you still need to be cognizant of when you're eating. When are you training? When are you going to bed? Like, there's a lot of factors here. And, are you eating one meal and then waiting 6 hours and then eating the other 3 meals within, 5? You're like, what? This is terrible. So, there's so many little things that you can do that people sometimes like, oh, it just matters what calories, right? No, like there are levels to this. If you've been eating haphazardly for 10 years, yes, tracking your calories is going to be a great tool. But once you've gotten past that, the very, very beginning stages of that, once you have an idea, and even if you've gotten past tracking, like I don't really track anymore, but I still eat on a regimented schedule, 4 protein meals a day, roughly split up this many hours, and it's, you still use those principles. And I still say, okay, I'm going to have, I love red meat, but I try to stick to lower fat red meat, right? Because I know that I like it. And then when I have red meat, I don't add extra fats in that meal typically, right? So there's just always like a give and take and a balance that you have to have with any kind of diet that you're choosing, whether you're tracking, not tracking, dieting, not dieting. So any other closing thoughts kind of on the lower fat side of things that you think would be really insightful?
Well, I think you really nailed it right there with just some of the behavioral habits, like paying attention to what is even in one meal. If this particular portion of your meal is higher fat, you probably want to reduce fat in other places. Or, even to say, look, if I have a meal that's higher carb here or higher fat, maybe my next meal needs to be a little bit, in reverse or the opposite to make up for it. So even if you are using a little bit more of an intuitive, way of eating, you still really have to pay attention. And that's for your long-term health. Even as a competitive physique athlete, I'm not going to track my food forever. And I go years and years without tracking, but I know what I'm consuming, and there are just no excuses. It's either a value of mine to stay healthy and be athletic, or it's not. I mean, I can screw up and be non-compliant in any form I'm eating unless it's an actual true value. And then you're not going to be able to make me deviate from it.
Yeah, exactly. Like when you travel with us and we make you eat a ton more calories than normal.
I know if I'm going to sit by you, I'm definitely going to be eating a lot more dessert than normal.
I'm like, hey guys, low fat, but besides when I go out to eat, yeah, I do have a dessert problem. It's pretty gnarly, but there is a trade-off, right? Like
we are not good for each other in that regard.
Like I know that if I'm going to go out to eat, and then I know if I'm going to have something, again, like all these habits, right? Like earlier, if I know like, hey, we're going to go have this like crazy dinner, I'm going to be a little bit more mindful earlier, and I'm maybe going to have a higher protein, lower calorie meal. So now I'm going to be drinking, and then I might have, share a dessert or something like that, right? So it just kind of, it's all about the habits, particularly if you're not tracking stuff, but we know, and it's all about making that decision. Like once you know what's in food, it truly is like your decision what you want to eat. I want to go have a Mexican, go have Mexican food, right? And there's like guac and chips, right? Like who doesn't love guac and chips? Hello. But then I'm not going to have like a super fatty meal too if I had that, right? If I didn't get the guac and chips, well, maybe I'll have a meal that has a little bit more fat in it. And, so you have to just be mindful of what you're consuming. And that's a whole, again, different conversation. But I'm really excited that we did get to dive into some of the science and just kind of cover this, because I think it really is just polarizing now. And people think that like, oh, keto is the best thing ever. And keto works for a lot of people. And it can be great in certain situations. But if you're looking for kind of more of the gold standard and long-term sustainability, high protein, moderate carb, lower fat, kind of through and through is one of the better things. So thank you so much for joining us. Tell everybody where they can find you.
TheDietDoc.com is my website, but
okay.
My name on Facebook and Instagram is just Joe Klemczewski, just my name.
Yeah, and we'll put that in the show notes so you guys can spell it, because I know nobody could spell that after they just heard it. They're like, okay, yeah.
What did he say?
What did he? All right. Thank you so much, Joe, and we'll catch you next time.